I never thought I'd be the guy in this situation. Seriously, who does? You don't get married thinking it'll ever come to this. I remember our wedding day like it was yesterday. My wifey, let's call her Emu, was glowing in her white dress, walking down the aisle towards me. I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. The vows we shared felt genuine, heartfelt, and promising. I knew marriage wasn't going to be a smooth ride all the time, but I believed we had what it took to weather any storm. I never could have predicted what was about to come. We had a pretty normal life for a while. Work, weekends with friends, vacations, lazy Sunday mornings. It all seemed so perfect, or at least perfect enough. We didn't have any kids yet, but we talked about it. We wanted to wait until we were ready. That's what we told everyone. But looking back now, I wonder if it was because we weren't ready as a couple. There were signs, little things I should have noticed, but I didn't want to see them. About 2 years into the marriage, Amy started acting a broken bar different. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint at first, it just little things. She seemed distant sometimes, preoccupied. She'd laugh at her phone a lot, and I'd ask, "Who's that?" And she'd just brush it off with, "Oh, just a friend from work." At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I trusted her completely. We'd been together for nearly 5 years by that point. 3 of those dating and 2 married. I never had a reason to question her loyalty. But then the late nights started. She'd come home late from work more often, saying she had deadlines or meetings that ran over. I'd ask if she needed me to come pick her up, and she'd insist she was fine. She'd arrive home, sometimes looking flustered or distracted, but she always had a reason. I didn't push too hard because, well, I figured she was just stressed. Everyone goes through those phases in their jobs, right? And she was ambitious, always striving for the next promotion. I didn't want to be the husband who added to her stress. The first time I suspected something was off was one Friday night. She came home late again, saying she had a work event that ran over. But when I looked at her, something felt a broken bar wrong. She was dressed a little too well for just a work event. Her hair was done, and she smelled like she'd just put on fresh perfume. I didn't say anything, but the thought stuck in my mind. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, maybe even a little insecure. But once the seed of doubt was planted, it was hard to ignore. I started paying more attention after that. When she'd come home late, I'd ask more questions, just casually, of course, but her answers always seemed rehearsed, almost too perfect. Still, I didn't confront her. I wasn't the confrontational type, and I didn't want to risk an argument over something I wasn't even sure about. But the doubts kept gnawing at me. Then, one night, everything changed. It was a Wednesday, and she had told me she'd be working late again. I was tired of sitting at home, so I decided to surprise her and bring her dinner. It was a small gesture, something I thought would make her night a little easier. I packed up her favorite meal and drove to her office. When I got there, the lights were on. But when I walked inside, something felt off. The office was too quiet. There was no sign of a meeting or anyone else being there. I walked to her desk, but she wasn't there either. My heart was pounding as I called her phone. She picked up after a few rings, sounding slightly out of breath. "Hey, babe," she said. "What's up?" "Hey, I'm at your office. I brought you dinner." "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, too long of a pause. "Oh, a broken bar. You a broken bar? I'm actually just out with some clients." "Sorry, I should have told you. I'll be back later." I felt my stomach drop. Something wasn't right, but I didn't want to believe it. I mumbled something about how it was okay and hung up. I sat in the parking lot for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was she lying to me? Was I just being paranoid? I didn't know what to think. But then things escalated. A few weeks later, I noticed she was getting more secretive with her phone. She'd leave the room to take calls, and she'd always keep her phone face down on the table when we were together. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who snoops through his wife's phone, but at this point, I couldn't ignore the red flags anymore. So one night, after she fell asleep, I picked up her phone and unlocked it. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I didn't want to find anything. I hoped I was wrong, but I wasn't. The messages were there, plain as day. She'd been texting someone named Ryan, and not just texting, but sending pictures, talking about meeting up, reminiscing about the last time they were together. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the messages, reading words that shattered the image I had of my wife. She'd been seeing him for months, sneaking around behind my back, and I had been none the wiser. I felt sick. I wanted to wake her up, to scream at her, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I put the phone down, walked out of the bedroom, and sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the wall. My mind was racing at what did this mean for us, for our marriage? Could we fix this? Did I even want to? The next morning, I couldn't even look at her. She went about her day like everything was normal, completely unaware that I knew her secret. I didn't know what to do. I spent the whole day at work in a daze, replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. I didn't want to believe that this was the end, but how could we move forward from something like this? That night, I confronted her. I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. I sat her down in the living room and asked her point blank, "Are you seeing someone else?" Her face went pale. She tried to deny it at first, but when I told her I had seen the messages, the facade crumbled. She broke down in tears, apologizing, saying it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But the words felt hollow. She had been lying to me for months, so how could I trust anything she said now? We argued for hours that night. I was furious, hurt, devastated. She kept begging for forgiveness, saying it was just an affair, that she still loved me, that she wanted to work things out. But I didn't know if I could forgive her. How do you forgive someone for something like that? The next few weeks were a blur. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was tense and uncomfortable. She swore she'd cut things off with Ryan, but I didn't trust her anymore. Every time her phone buzzed, I wondered if it was him. Every time she was late coming home, I questioned where she was. The foundation of our marriage had been cracked, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Then she dropped the bombshell. One evening, after another strained dinner, she sat me down again. Her hands were trembling, and she looked like she was about to be sick. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I braced myself, already fearing the worst. "What is it?" I asked, my throat tight. She took a deep breath, then said the words that changed everything. "I'm pregnant." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Pregnant? We hadn't even been trying. We hadn't even been close. Not with everything going on. My mind immediately went to Ryan. My heart sank. "Is it mine?" I asked, my voice cold, harsher than I intended. She looked away, tears streaming down her face. "Yeah, broken bar, I don't know," she admitted. "It could be, but a broken bar, it could also be his." I stared at her, unable to comprehend what she had just said. My wife was pregnant, and the baby might not even be mine. It felt like a cruel joke, like something out of a nightmare. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to process the enormity of the situation. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. She begged me to stay, to work things out. She said we could get a paternity test after the baby was born, that we could figure it out together. But I wasn't sure I wanted to. How could I raise a child that might not be mine? How could I look at the child and not see the betrayal that led to its conception? The months dragged on. We stayed together, but it was only because I didn't know what else to do. I was lost, torn between the love I still had for her and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. When the baby was finally born, everything came to a head. I'll never forget the moment I held the baby in my arms for the first time. I looked down at that tiny, innocent face, and all I could think was, is this my child? I didn't feel the joy I should have felt. Instead, I felt a deep, painful uncertainty. The paternity test was scheduled, but until we had the results, I was living in limbo. Then came the birth certificate. The nurse came into the room with the paperwork, asking me to sign the birth certificate as the father. My hand hovered over the paper, the pen feeling heavy in my grip. Amy was watching me, her eyes pleading, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't sign my name to a child that might not be mine. "I'm not signing it," I said, my voice low but firm. Amy's face twisted in shock and anger. "What do you mean you're not signing it?" she demanded. "You're the father." "Am I?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "We don't even know that yet." The room went silent. Amy stared at me, her face contorting with the mixture of rage and desperation. "How could you?" she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "How could you do this to us?" I stood my ground. "How could I? How could you? You're the one who had the affair. You're the one who put us in this situation. I'm not signing anything until I know for sure." She lost it. She started screaming, accusing me of abandoning her, of not caring about the baby, of being cruel and heartless. But I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty. I had been pushed to my limit, and I wasn't going to be manipulated into pretending everything was okay. I walked out of the hospital room that day, leaving Amy behind with the baby. I told her I'd be back after the paternity test results came in. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to be trapped in a lie any longer.